2,500 years ago, a boy knelt in the dirt behind his mother's house and arranged small stones in careful rows. He was playing a game, but not the kind other children played. While the boys of his village chased each other through the dusty lanes of Khufu, this child, thin, fatherless, dressed in rough hemp, was practicing rituals. He had watched the ceremonies at the local temple with an intensity that unnerved his mother. He memorized every gesture, every placement of a cup, every angle of a bow. And now, alone in the yard, he recreated them with whatever he could find. Stones for vessels, sticks for incense, a flat rock for the altar. His name was Confucius. The world would come to know him as Confucius. He was 3 years old when his father died, an aging warrior named Kong He, who had married a girl decades younger than himself because he needed an heir. His mother, Yan Zhengzai, was barely out of her teens. She raised her son alone, in poverty, in a small town in the state of Lu, in what is now Shandong province, eastern China. The boy should have no future. He was poor, fatherless, and living in an age of chaos, the spring and autumn period when the great Zhou dynasty was crumbling and feudal lords fought endless wars for scraps of power. The old rituals that had held society together were breaking down. The bonds between ruler and ruled, parent and child, friend and friend, all of it was fraying. Into this broken world, this peculiar child kept practicing his rituals with stones and sticks, as if the gestures themselves mattered, as if getting them right could hold something together that was falling apart. He was right, not about the stones, about the principle, about the idea that how you behave, the care you bring to every action, every relationship, every small moment is the only thing that can hold a world together when everything else fails. What is remarkable is that nobody told him to do this. No school assigned it. No parent insisted upon it. Something inside this child recognized that the ceremonies mattered, that the ancient forms of respect and reverence were not just performance, but a kind of language, a language of care, a language that said, "The world has an order, and I want to understand it. I want to participate in it. I want to get it right." The neighbors must have thought him strange, a thin boy in the dirt bowing to a flat rock. But he was not playing pretend. He was rehearsing something real. He was teaching himself, long before he had the words for it, that how you do something matters as much as what you do, that the gesture of pouring tea, the angle of a bow, the placement of an offering. These things carry meaning. They carry respect. They carry a kind of love that does not need to announce itself. This was the seed. Everything that followed, the teaching, the wandering, the centuries of influence, grew from this one impulse. A fatherless child in a broken world, choosing order over chaos, choosing care over indifference, choosing to practice the rituals even when no one was watching. Tonight, as you settle in, let that thought be your first companion. You do not need to remember anything you hear. You do not need to study or analyze or take notes. Just listen, the way you would listen to rain on a roof, or to a friend telling stories by candlelight. Let your body rest, let your breathing slow, and let us spend some time with one of the most remarkable human beings who ever lived, a man who failed at almost everything he attempted during his lifetime, and whose words have echoed for 25 centuries because they were true. His students remembered his voice. They wrote down what he said, and across the vast distance of time, those words arrive here tonight, undimmed, unhurried, still warm with the breath of the man who spoke them. The lamp is lit, the bamboo sways outside the window, and the old teacher is ready to speak. Confucius grew up poor, but he grew up curious. His mother taught him what she could. She told him stories of the old rituals, the ceremonies that had once bound the kingdom of Zhou together in a web of mutual respect. She told him about his father's family, who claimed descent from the old royal house of the ancient Shang dynasty. There was nobility in his blood, even if there was no money in the house. By the time he was a teenager, Confucius was teaching himself everything he could find. He studied the ancient texts, the book of songs, the book of documents, the rites and ceremonies of the Zhou court. He learned to play the qin, the seven-stringed zither that was the instrument of scholars and sages. He learned archery and charioteering, because a gentleman was expected to master the 6 arts: ritual, music, archery, charioteering, calligraphy, and mathematics. He had no teacher, no school, no patron. He simply loved to learn. And that love, pure, persistent, unshakable, would become the foundation of everything he built. Is it not a pleasure, he would later say, to learn and to practice what you have learned? This is the very first line of the Analects, the opening words of the most influential book in Chinese history. Not a command, not a doctrine, a question about pleasure, about the simple joy of understanding something new and making it part of your life. Confucius, at 15, decided to dedicate his life to learning. At 20, he began to teach. He did not open a formal school. There were no such institutions in his world. He simply accepted anyone who came to him wanting to learn, rich or poor, noble or common. This was revolutionary. In an age when education was the privilege of aristocrats, Confucius taught anyone who brought, as he put it, a bundle of dried meat as tuition, the simplest possible offering. His classroom was a courtyard, or a grove of trees, or the side of a road. His method was conversation. He did not lecture. He asked questions. He told stories. He challenged his students to think for themselves, and then gently corrected them when they went astray. I never enlighten anyone who is not eager to learn. I never provide the words for anyone who is not already trying to speak. If I raise one corner of a topic and the student cannot come back with the other three, I do not repeat the lesson. This sounds strict, but it came from a deep respect for his students' capacity. Confucius believed that every person had the potential for goodness, for what he called ren, a word that is almost impossible to translate. Humaneness, benevolence, the quality of being fully, generously, authentically human. Ren was not a gift reserved for the privileged. It was available to anyone willing to cultivate it. And cultivation was the point. Confucius did not believe people were born good or bad. He believed they were born with potential, and that potential was developed through learning, through practice, through the daily discipline of trying to be a little better than you were yesterday. By nature, people are close to one another, he taught. By practice, they drift far apart. His students came from every walk of life. There was Yan Hui, his favorite, desperately poor, living in a narrow lane, eating from a single bamboo dish and drinking from a gourd dipper, yet radiating a quiet joy that amazed everyone who knew him. What a worthy man was Hui! A single bamboo dish of rice, a single gourd of drink. Others could not have endured such misery, but Hui did not let his happiness be affected. There was Zilu, bold, impetuous, a former street tough, who became Confucius's most loyal companion. Zilu was brave to the point of recklessness, and Confucius was constantly reining him in. "If you had to lead the 3 armies, whom would you take with you?" a student once asked. "I would not take the man who wrestles tigers with his bare hands, or wades across rivers," a clear jab at Zilu. "I would take the man who approaches difficulties with caution, and who prefers to succeed through strategy." There was Zigong, brilliant, eloquent, a gifted diplomat and successful merchant who would become one of the wealthiest men in China. And Zhengzi, and Zixia, and dozens more, each one drawn to this teacher who treated them not as vessels to be filled, but as fires to be kindled. Rest with that image, a courtyard in ancient China, dappled with shade from an apricot tree, the hum of insects in the heat, students sitting on bamboo mats, listening to a teacher who asked more questions than he answered, and who loved learning more than anything else in the world. At the heart of everything Confucius taught, there is a single idea, a principle so simple that a child can understand it, and so profound that the wisest person alive has not exhausted its meaning. One of his students, Zigong, the gifted one, the diplomat, asked him, "Is there a single word that can serve as a guide for one's entire life?" Confucius thought for a moment, and then he said, "Perhaps the word shu. Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself." This is sometimes called the silver rule, the negative form of the golden rule found in many traditions. But Confucius said it 500 years before Jesus of Nazareth spoke the words, "Unto others as you would have them do unto you." And there is something in the negative phrasing that deserves attention. Confucius did not say, "Do good things for others." He said, "Do not impose." The emphasis is on restraint, on awareness, on the discipline of pausing before you act and asking yourself, "Would I want this done to me?" It is not about grand gestures of kindness, though those are welcome. It is about the daily practice of not causing harm, of not speaking the cruel word, not making the selfish demand, not burdening others with what you would not willingly bear yourself. This principle, shu, reciprocity, consideration, was not just an ethical rule for Confucius. It was the foundation of everything. Every relationship, every ritual, every act of governance, all of it flowed from this one simple recognition. Other people are real. Their feelings are as valid as yours. Their suffering matters as much as yours. And the measure of your character is not what you achieve for yourself, but how you treat the people around you. The word that Confucius used for this deeper quality was ren. Of all the concepts in the Analects, ren is the most important and the most elusive. It has been translated as benevolence, humaneness, goodness, love, virtue, compassion, and human-heartedness. None of these captures it fully. Ren is the quality that makes a person fully human, not in the biological sense, but in the moral sense. To have ren is to be awake to the reality of other people, to feel what they feel, to act from a place of genuine care rather than self-interest. Is Ren really so far away? Confucius asked. If I want Ren, there it is. It has arrived. This is one of the most comforting things he ever said. Virtue is not distant. It is not achieved only after years of study or meditation or sacrifice. It is available right now, in this moment, in the next choice you make. If you want to be good, you already are, because the wanting is the beginning. But Confucius was also honest about how difficult it is to sustain. He admitted with the wry humor that runs through the Analects like a quiet stream. He was not naive. He did not believe that people were naturally good and only needed permission to show it. He believed that goodness required effort, daily, ongoing, sometimes exhausting effort. Like learning, like music, like any art, virtue was a practice, not a state of being. He said, the firm, the enduring, the simple, and the modest are near to virtue. Not the brilliant, not the powerful, not the successful, the firm, the enduring, the simple, the modest, the people who show up every day and try to do the right thing, even when no one is watching, even when it costs them something, even when the world does not seem to notice or care. These quiet, steady souls, they are the ones Confucius admired most. Not the heroes of legend, but the patient, ordinary people who hold the world together through sheer, unremarkable goodness. Let that settle now, as the lamp flickers and the night deepens. Virtue is not far away. It is as close as your next breath, your next thought, your next small act of kindness toward the person beside you or toward yourself. Confucius spent his life describing a kind of person he called the Junzi. The word is sometimes translated as gentleman, sometimes as the superior person, sometimes as the exemplary person. None of these is quite right. The Junzi is not superior in rank or birth. The Junzi is someone who has cultivated themselves through learning, through practice, through honest self-reflection, into the kind of person the world needs. The exemplary person is not a utensil, Confucius said. This strange little sentence is one of the most important in the Analects. A cup holds liquid, a knife cuts, but a person who has truly cultivated themselves, is not limited to one function. They can adapt, they can grow, they can respond to whatever the moment requires, not from a fixed set of rules, but from a deep inner compass of character and wisdom. The Junzi seeks what is right. The petty person seeks what is profitable. This is one of Confucius's sharpest distinctions. Not that profit is evil, he never said that, But the Junzi asks first, is this the right thing to do? While the petty person asks first, what's in it for me? The order of these questions shapes an entire life. When you see a worthy person, try to equal them. When you see an unworthy person, examine yourself. This is one of the most psychologically honest teachings in the Analects. We learn from everyone, not just from the wise. The person who irritates you, the person who disappoints you, the person whose behavior you find small or selfish, they are mirrors. They show you what you do not want to become. And if you are honest with yourself, they sometimes show you what you already are. The Junzi is not perfect. Confucius never claimed perfection for himself or expected it from others. He said, I have never met anyone who truly loved virtue as much as they loved physical beauty. I have never met a person of complete virtue, not even himself. The Junzi is someone who is trying consistently, honestly, without excuses. The exemplary person is calm and spacious, he said. The petty person is anxious and full of distress. This is not a personality description. It is a consequence of living a certain way. When you are grounded in virtue, when you have done your best and accepted your limits, a quiet spaciousness opens up inside you. You do not need to grasp or compete or defend. You can simply be. The petty person, by contrast, is always grasping, always worried about losing what they have or not getting what they want. Their world is small and anxious. The Junzi also understands that they cannot do everything alone. Virtue is never lonely, Confucius promised. It always has neighbors. If you are trying to be good, you will find others who are trying too. Character attracts character. Decency gravitates toward decency. You are not as alone in your efforts as you sometimes feel. There is a deep comfort in this promise. It means that goodness is not a solitary labor. It means that the world is not as cold as it sometimes appears. Somewhere right now, someone else is trying just as hard as you are, making the same quiet effort, choosing patience when anger would be easier, choosing honesty when silence would be safer. You may never meet them, but they are there. They are always there. Virtue has neighbors, and those neighbors are closer than you think. And the Junzi knows when to be silent. Clever words and a pleasing countenance, Confucius observed, are seldom signs of true virtue. The person who talks the most about goodness is often the person who practices it the least. The Junzi speaks carefully, acts deliberately, and lets their behavior speak louder than their words. There is a quietness to Confucius's vision of the good life that makes it especially fitting for tonight. He was not calling for revolution or heroism or dramatic acts of self-sacrifice. He was calling for attention, for care, for the small daily disciplines that build a character the way water builds a canyon, slowly, persistently, with a gentleness that can reshape the world. In 497 BCE, when Confucius was about 54 years old, he left home. He had spent years in the service of his home state of Lu, rising eventually to the position of Minister of Crime. By all accounts, he was effective. Crime decreased. The state became more orderly. The economy improved. But the Duke of Lu was more interested in pleasure than in governance. A neighboring state sent a gift of 80 beautiful dancing girls and 100 fine horses, and the Duke abandoned his duties to enjoy them. Confucius waited 3 days for the Duke to resume the sacrificial rites. He did not. Confucius left. Not in anger exactly, in sorrow. He had believed that if he could find one ruler who would listen, one leader willing to govern through virtue rather than force, he could show the world that the old ways worked, that kindness was not weakness, that ritual and respect could hold a society together better than armies and punishments. He did not find that ruler, not in Lu, and so he set out to find one elsewhere. For 14 years Confucius wandered. Think of that. 14 years. A man in his 50s and then his 60s, walking the dusty roads of ancient China with a small band of loyal disciples, going from state to state, seeking an audience with any ruler who might listen, being rejected, misunderstood, sometimes threatened, sleeping in the open, eating whatever could be found, never giving up. In the state of Song, a military officer tried to kill him, not because of anything Confucius had done, but because the officer feared the influence of his teachings. Confucius barely escaped, losing his companions in the confusion. When his students finally found him, they were terrified. "How can you look so calm?" one asked. "Heaven has given me this virtue," Confucius replied. "What can a military officer do to me?" In the state of Kwang, he was surrounded by an armed mob who mistook him for a different person, a political enemy they had been seeking. For 5 days Confucius and his disciples were trapped, not knowing if they would live. Even then, according to the records, Confucius continued to teach. He took out his keen and played music while they waited. The worst moment came between the states of Chen and Chai. Confucius and his followers were stranded in the wilderness. Their food ran out completely. The disciples were so weak from hunger they could barely stand. Some were angry, some were in despair. Zilu, bold, loyal, impetuous Zilu, finally lost his patience. "Does a gentleman also suffer hardship?" he demanded. Confucius looked at him. "The gentleman is steady in hardship," he said simply. "The petty person in hardship is swept away." This is one of the defining moments of the Analects. Not a philosophical argument, not a clever saying. A man, hungry and far from home, telling his friend that the measure of character is not whether you suffer, but how you carry your suffering, whether you let it sweep you away, or whether you remain steady. Confucius never found his ideal ruler. After 14 years of wandering, he returned to Lu in 484 BCE, an old man now, 68 years old. He spent his remaining years teaching and editing the ancient texts, the Book of Songs, the Spring and Autumn Annals, the Book of Rites. He was trying to preserve the best of the old world so that it would be available to whoever came next. A gatekeeper at the stone gate once asked about him. "Confucius," the gatekeeper said, "is he not the one who knows it is impossible and yet keeps trying?" It was meant as mockery. It became the most beautiful description of his entire life. Every generation since has found something in those words, not pity, not irony, something closer to awe, because most of us stop trying when the odds turn against us. Most of us need some evidence that our effort will be rewarded. Confucius needed no such evidence. He had something more durable than hope. He had conviction. Let that settle now. The image of a man who walked for 14 years toward a goal he never reached and never stopped believing the walk was worthwhile. There is a side to Confucius that the philosophy books often miss. He loved music. Not in the casual way that most people enjoy a song. Confucius loved music the way some people love the ocean. It was a force of nature to him, something that reached into the deepest part of his being and rearranged things there. When he encountered beautiful music, he was changed by it, physically, emotionally, permanently. The most famous example is the Shao, an ancient piece of court music attributed to the legendary Emperor Shun, a sage king from the distant past. Confucius heard the shao performed for the first time in the state of qi, and the experience overwhelmed him. For 3 months, the Analects records, he did not notice the taste of meat. 3 months! The most basic sensory pleasure, the taste of food, was pushed aside by the beauty of what he had heard. I did not imagine, Confucius said, that music could reach such a level. This is not the image most people have of Confucius, the stern philosopher, the sage of ritual and duty. This is a man undone by beauty, a man for whom the arts were not decoration or entertainment, but a pathway to the deepest truths about human existence. He studied the Qin, the classical zither, with a teacher named Music Master Xiang. According to Sima Qian, the great historian who wrote the earliest biography of Confucius, the master's approach to learning a single piece of music reveals everything about his character. After practicing one melody for many days, Music Master Xiang said, "You have mastered the notes. You may move on." "I have mastered the notes, but I have not yet grasped the rhythm," Confucius replied. After more days of practice, the teacher said again, "You have grasped the rhythm." "I have grasped the rhythm, but I have not yet understood the mood, the intention behind the music." After even more practice, "You have understood the intention." "I have understood the intention, but I have not yet grasped the character of the composer." Finally, after prolonged study, Confucius looked up and said, "Now I sense him. Dark-complexioned, tall, with eyes that look far into the distance, like a king who surveys the 4 quarters of the world. Who could have composed this but King Wen?" Music Master Xiang rose and bowed twice. It was indeed a piece attributed to King Wen, the founder of the Zhou dynasty. Confucius had found the man inside the music. This story tells you everything about how Confucius approached the world. He was never satisfied with the surface. The notes were not enough. The rhythm was not enough. Even the emotional mood was not enough. He wanted to understand the human being who had created the beauty, the specific person with their specific character, living in their specific moment in history. Knowledge for Confucius was always personal. It was always about people. When I am in the company of others singing, and someone sings well, I have them sing again while I join in the harmony. This is not a man lecturing from a podium. This is a man singing with friends, delighting in the harmony, asking for an encore because the moment was too beautiful to let pass. There is a warmth here, a humanity, that 2,000 years of reverence has sometimes obscured. He believed that music and ritual were not separate from morality. They were its purest expression. A society that produced beautiful music was a society in harmony with itself. A society that neglected music was coming apart at the seams. Let a person be moved by the songs, he taught, established by ritual and perfected by music. Music was the final step, the crowning art, the place where all the other virtues came together and became something you could hear. Let the thought of music carry you now, the image of an old scholar sitting in a courtyard at twilight, drawing his fingers across the strings of a keen, the notes hanging in the warm air like incense, the students listening in the gathering dark, and somewhere in the music a truth too deep for words. Of all his students, Confucius loved Yan Hui the most. Yan Hui was poor, desperately, almost absurdly poor. He lived in a narrow lane, what we might call an alley, in a tiny room. He ate from a single bamboo dish and drank water from a gourd dipper. He owned almost nothing. By every material measure, his life was a failure. And yet he was the happiest person Confucius had ever known. What a worthy man was Hui, Confucius said again and again. A single bamboo dish of rice, a single gourd of drink, living in a narrow lane. Others could not have endured such misery, but Hui did not let his happiness be affected. What a worthy man was Hui! There is something in this image that transcends time and culture. A person who has nothing and is content, not because they are ignorant of what they lack, but because they have found something more valuable than possessions. Yan Hui had found Ren, that quality of full, generous humaneness that Confucius spent his life teaching. And in finding Ren, he had found a joy that poverty could not touch. Confucius recognized in Yan Hui something he rarely found in anyone else, a natural capacity for goodness that seemed to require no effort. Hui could go 3 months without his mind departing from Ren, Confucius said. The rest of my students can only manage it for a day or a month. Not a criticism of the others, simply an honest recognition of something extraordinary. They had a relationship that went beyond teacher and student. There was a moment during the crisis in Kwang, when the armed mob surrounded them, when Confucius and Yan Hui became separated. When Yan Hui finally appeared, safe, Confucius said, "I thought you were dead." And Yan Hui replied, "While you are alive, how would I dare to die?" The tenderness in this exchange is almost unbearable. A student so devoted to his teacher that he would not allow himself to die first. A teacher so relieved to see his student alive that he forgets his own dignity and simply says what he feels. And then Yan Hui died. He died young, probably in his early 30s. The cause is not recorded. Perhaps illness. Perhaps the poverty that Confucius had praised for not breaking his spirit had, in the end, broken his body. Confucius wept. He wept with an abandon that shocked his other disciples. They had never seen the master like this, the composed, measured teacher of ritual propriety, sobbing openly, inconsolably. "Heaven has destroyed me," he cried. "Heaven has destroyed me." The disciples, worried, said, "Master, you are showing excessive grief." "Am I?" Confucius replied. "If I do not grieve excessively for this man, then for whom should I grieve?" There is no philosophy here, no wisdom teaching, just a man who has lost the person he loved most in the world and refuses to pretend that the loss is manageable. The Analects records this moment with unflinching honesty. The greatest teacher in Chinese history, undone by grief and unapologetic about it. This is what makes the Analects more than a philosophy text. It is a portrait of a real human being, a man who taught restraint but could not restrain his tears, a man who valued ritual composure but abandoned it completely when the person who mattered most was gone. Later, when he had composed himself, Confucius reflected on what he had lost. "There was Yan Hui," he said. "He loved learning. He never redirected his anger. He never repeated a mistake." 2 sentences, and in them a portrait of a human being who had mastered the most difficult arts of all. Not brilliance, not ambition, self-awareness. The ability to feel anger without passing it on to others. The ability to make a mistake and actually learn from it so deeply that it never happened again. Rest with that, the knowledge that even the wisest among us are not immune to grief, that love and loss are woven together so tightly that you cannot have one without the other, and that the measure of what someone meant to you is the depth of the silence they leave behind. Confucius believed that learning was the most important thing a person could do. Not learning for credentials or status or career advancement. Learning as a way of being alive, of staying awake to the world, of refusing to let your mind grow small and stale and rigid. To study and not think is a waste, he said. To think and not study is dangerous. This pair of sentences contains an entire philosophy of education. Study without thought is empty. You accumulate information, but never make it your own. Thought without study is dangerous. You spin elaborate theories from nothing, building castles on air, convinced of conclusions you never tested against reality. The balance between the two, between taking in the world and reflecting on what you have taken in, is the heartbeat of a well-lived life. Inhale, exhale, study, think, receive, reflect. When I walk with two others, Confucius said, I always find a teacher among them. I follow what is good in them and correct what is not good in myself. Everyone is a teacher, not just the wise or accomplished. The person walking beside you right now, literally or figuratively, has something to show you. Maybe it is a virtue you want to emulate. Maybe it is a fault you recognize in yourself and want to correct. Either way, you are learning. The world is a classroom, and the enrollment is permanent. This openness to learning was not weakness. It was the deepest form of strength Confucius knew. The truly wise person is not one who has all the answers, he taught. The truly wise person is one who knows what they know and knows what they do not know. Shall I teach you what knowledge is? He asked a student. When you know something, to know that you know it. When you do not know something, to know that you do not know it. That is knowledge. This sounds simple. It is not. The human ego is remarkably skilled at pretending it knows things it does not, at filling gaps in understanding with bluster and confidence, at confusing the feeling of certainty with the reality of knowledge. Confucius's teaching here is a kind of intellectual humility that most people never achieve. The willingness to say, I don't know, and mean it. He practiced this himself. I am not one who was born with knowledge, he admitted. I am one who is fond of antiquity and earnest in seeking it. He did not claim special inspiration or divine insight. He claimed effort. He claimed love of learning. He claimed the willingness to work harder than anyone else to understand what mattered. And he taught that learning was not finished until it changed your behavior. The exemplary person is ashamed when their words exceed their deeds, he said. Knowledge that does not change how you live is not yet knowledge. It is still just information, sitting in the mind like furniture in a room no one enters. At 15, I set my heart on learning, Confucius once told his students, laying out the stages of his own life. At 30, I took my stand. At 40, I was no longer confused. At 50, I understood heaven's mandate. At 60, my ear was attuned. At 70, I could follow my heart's desire without overstepping the boundaries. This passage is one of the most famous in the Analects, and one of the most comforting. It tells you that growth is slow, that understanding comes in stages, that even Confucius, the greatest teacher in Chinese history, did not fully understand himself until he was 50, did not fully trust himself until he was 70. The life of the mind is not a sprint. It is a long, patient walk through changing seasons. And you are on that walk right now, whether you know it or not, whether you are 15 or 70, you are learning. Every day you are alive, the world is teaching you something. The only question is whether you are paying attention, whether you are open to the lesson, whether you can receive what the day is offering with the same humility that Confucius brought to his own long education. Tonight, you do not need to pay attention. Tonight, the lesson is rest. One day, Confucius was standing by a river. We do not know which river. We do not know the season, or the time of day, or who was with him. The Analects gives us no context at all. Just a man standing by flowing water and speaking one of the most beautiful sentences in all of world literature. It passes on like this, never ceasing, day or night. That is all. No explanation, no interpretation, just the observation. The river flows. It does not stop, not for darkness, not for sleep, not for joy or grief or the turning of the seasons. It simply goes on, carrying everything with it, endlessly. Scholars have debated for centuries what Confucius meant. Was he mourning the passage of time? Was he celebrating the constancy of the natural world? Was he making a philosophical point about the nature of change, or an emotional statement about the losses he had endured? The answer may be all of these at once. The power of the sentence lies in its openness. It is a mirror. Whatever you bring to it, you see reflected back. If you are grieving, it speaks of loss. Everything passes. The people you love will pass. The moments you treasure will pass. Even the grief itself will pass, carried downstream like a leaf on the current. If you are anxious, it speaks of perspective. Whatever is troubling you tonight, the river was flowing before you were born, and it will flow after you are gone. Your worries are real, but they are not permanent. They are ripples on a surface that will smooth itself in time. If you are at peace, it speaks of beauty. The world is in motion. Everything is always changing, and there is something magnificent about that, something worth watching, worth pausing for, worth standing beside a river and simply noticing. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said something similar. You cannot step in the same river twice. But Confucius's version is less philosophical and more emotional. He's not making an argument. He's sharing a feeling. He's standing by a river and being moved by it. He's letting the water speak. Simon Leys, one of the finest modern translators of the Analects, called this passage the equivalent of Heraclitus in 6 Chinese characters. 6 characters, 12 syllables in Chinese, and in them an entire philosophy of time and change and the human heart. There is a tradition in Chinese painting of depicting scholars beside rivers. The figure is always small, dwarfed by mountains and water and sky. This is not diminishment, it is proportion. The human being is part of something vast, and knowing that is not frightening, it is restful. Confucius stood by many rivers during his wandering years. He crossed the Yellow River and the rivers of Wei and Chen. He walked alongside waterways whose names have been forgotten, while the water itself kept flowing. Perhaps it was during one of those crossings, tired, aging, far from home, that the thought struck him with its full force. The river does not worry about where it has been. It does not fear where it is going. It simply moves, steady, unhurried, faithful to its own nature. And in that faithfulness there is a kind of perfection. The ancient Chinese understood water as a teacher. Lao Tzu, a near contemporary of Confucius, wrote that the highest good is like water. It benefits all things without contending with them. Confucius would not have disagreed. Water is patient. Water is humble. Water goes where it is needed without asking for recognition. And water, given enough time, can wear down the hardest stone, not through force, through persistence, through the simple, unrelenting act of showing up, day after day, century after century, never ceasing. You are beside that river tonight. The water is flowing. It has been flowing for 2,500 years since Confucius stood on its bank. It will flow tomorrow and the day after that. You do not need to stop it. You do not need to understand it. You only need to listen to it. The way it carries everything gently downstream, the way it never hurries, the way it moves in the darkness just as smoothly as it moves in the light. Rest now beside the river. Let the sound of it carry you. Confucius cared about small things. How you entered a room, how you greeted a guest, how you held a cup, how you bowed, the angle of your posture when speaking to an elder, the tone of your voice when addressing a friend, the care you took in preparing a simple meal. This concern with what he called li, ritual propriety, the proper performance of daily actions, has made Confucius seem, to some modern readers, like a fussy schoolmaster obsessed with etiquette. But that reading misses the point entirely. For Confucius, ritual was not about following rules, it was about paying attention. Every gesture, every act of courtesy, every small ceremony of daily life was an opportunity to be fully present, to recognize the sacredness of ordinary moments, to treat the people around you with the respect they deserved. Ritual without reverence, he said, is just going through the motions. The rituals Confucius valued were not empty forms, they were expressions of inner feeling. You bow to an elder not because the rules require it, but because you genuinely respect them. You prepare food carefully, not because etiquette demands it, but because the person you are feeding matters to you. The outer form and the inner feeling must match. When they do, even the smallest act becomes beautiful. Consider his teachings about filial piety, xiao, the devotion of children to their parents. This was the foundation of Confucian ethics, not because parents demanded it, but because the parent-child relationship was the first relationship anyone experienced, and how you handled it shaped how you would handle every other relationship in your life. While your parents are alive, Confucius said, do not travel far, and if you must travel, always have a set destination. This sounds restrictive, but listen to what is underneath it. Your parents worry about you. When you are far away and they do not know where you are, they suffer. Filial piety is not blind obedience. Confucius explicitly said that children should remonstrate gently if their parents are wrong. It is awareness. It is the recognition that your life is not entirely your own, that other people have a stake in it, that love creates obligations, and those obligations are not burdens, but gifts. Nowadays, people think they are being filial if they can feed their parents, but we also feed dogs and horses. If there is no respect, what is the difference? The difference is attention. The difference is presence. You can provide for someone's physical needs without being present to them as a person. You can write the check, stock the refrigerator, pay the bills, and still be utterly absent. Confucius was calling for something deeper than provision. He was calling for presence, for the quality of attention that says, "You matter to me." not what you do for me, not what you represent. You, the specific, irreplaceable person in front of me right now. This is what ritual meant to Confucius. Not ceremony for its own sake, but the practiced habitual quality of attention that turns ordinary life into something sacred. He was meticulous about small courtesies. When he passed someone in mourning, even a stranger, he would lean forward in his carriage, a gesture of acknowledgement, of shared sorrow. When he saw someone carrying the ceremonial tablets, he would bow, even if the person was of lower rank. These were not performances, they were reflexes of the heart, habits of reverence so deeply ingrained that they arose without effort. And that was the point. When you practice a virtue long enough, it becomes part of you. You no longer choose to be respectful. You simply are respectful. The ritual has done its work. It has shaped your character the way a riverbed shapes the water that flows through it. Overcome yourself and return to ritual, Confucius said. That is Ren. The self he meant was the small self, the self of impulse, of appetite, of impatience and self-interest. Ritual was the path back from that narrowness to something larger, something more generous, something more fully human. Making tea becomes a ritual when you are fully present to the warmth of the cup, the color of the water, the person you are making it for. Walking becomes a ritual when you notice the ground beneath your feet, the air on your skin, the particular quality of light at this hour. Even lying here in the dark, listening, this is a ritual. You are paying attention to your own existence. You are being present to the fact that you are alive. Rest is a ritual too. Confucius would have understood that. Not everyone agreed with Confucius, and the Analects, to its great credit, preserves some of those disagreements. During the wandering years, Confucius and his disciples encountered people who thought his entire project was absurd. Hermits and recluses, Taoist-style sages who had withdrawn from society, living simply in the mountains and fields, tending their crops and wanting nothing to do with the chaos of the human world. One such encounter happened near a river crossing. Confucius sent Zilu to ask two farmers, Changju and Jani, where the ford was. When they learned that the travelers were Confucius and his disciples, they did not offer directions. Instead, they offered criticism. "The whole world is a churning flood," one of them said, "and who can change it? Rather than following a man who flees from one ruler to the next, would it not be better to follow those who have withdrawn from the world altogether?" Zilu reported this to Confucius, And Confucius's reply is one of the most quietly powerful moments in the Analects. He said, "A person cannot herd with birds and beasts. If I do not associate with the followers of men, then with whom would I associate? If the way prevailed in the world, I would not be trying to change it." The world is broken. Confucius knew this. The hermits knew it. They agreed on the diagnosis. They disagreed on the prescription. The hermits said, "The world is beyond repair, so withdraw. Save yourself. Tend your garden. Let the flood take what it takes." Confucius said, "The world is broken, and that is exactly why I cannot leave it. I am a person. I belong among people. If the world were already good, my efforts would be unnecessary. It is precisely because the world is broken that I must keep trying to fix it." Is he not the one who knows it is impossible and yet keeps trying? This is the tragedy and the glory of Confucius's life. He knew that no ruler would listen. He knew that his dream of a virtuous society was, in his lifetime, unachievable. He knew that the wandering was futile, the rejection inevitable, the suffering pointless by any practical measure. And he kept going. Not because he was naive, not because he was stubborn, because he believed deeply, unshakably, that the effort itself mattered, that trying to be good, even when goodness seems impossible, is the only worthy response to a world in pain, that the alternative, withdrawal, resignation, the shrug of "it doesn't matter," was a kind of death more final than the physical kind. The hermits were not wrong. Their path, simplicity, solitude, harmony with nature, has its own beauty and its own truth. Confucius never condemned them. He simply said, "That is not my path. My path leads through the world, not away from it. And if the world breaks my heart, at least I will have been present in it. At least I will have tried." There were other encounters like this one. A madman named Jie, or perhaps he only pretended to be mad, ran past Confucius's carriage, singing, "Phoenix, Phoenix, how your virtue has declined. What is past cannot be undone, but the future is still within reach. Give up, give up. Those who serve in government today are in danger." Confucius climbed down from his carriage to speak with the man, but Jie hurried away, laughing. Another hermit, asked by Zilu for directions, said, "The whole world is in disorder. Who is going to change it? Rather than follow someone who merely avoids bad rulers, would you not be better off following those who avoid the world entirely?" These voices of withdrawal run through the Analects like a minor key in music, a counter-melody that makes the main theme more poignant by contrast. There is a question hidden in these exchanges that is relevant tonight, not as something to solve, but as something to rest beside. Where do you stand between the hermit and the sage, between withdrawal and engagement, between the peace of solitude and the mess of human connection? You do not need to answer tonight. Tonight, you are the hermit. Tonight, you have withdrawn from the noise, the demands, the flooding world, into this quiet space. And that is good. That is necessary. Even Confucius rested. Even the most dedicated teacher eventually set down his scrolls and closes his eyes. Confucius was particular about food. This might seem a strange thing to mention in a story about one of humanity's greatest philosophers, but the Analects devotes an entire passage to his eating habits, and it reveals something important about the man. He would not eat rice that had been poorly cooked. He would not eat meat that had been improperly cut. He would not eat food that had lost its color, or food that smelled wrong, or food that was out of season. He insisted on the proper condiment with each dish. He did not talk while eating. He did not talk while in bed. Some readers find this ridiculous. Others find it endearing. Confucius would probably say both responses miss the point. He cared about food for the same reason he cared about ritual, because paying attention to the small things is not small. The person who eats carelessly, who shovels food into their mouth without noticing the taste, the texture, the effort that went into preparing it, that person is not just failing at etiquette, they are failing at presence. They are sleepwalking through one of life's most basic pleasures. I transmit, I do not innovate, Confucius said. I trust in and love the ancients. This is one of his most misunderstood statements. It sounds like intellectual timidity, a refusal to think for himself, but it was the opposite. Confucius believed that the ancient sages had already discovered the fundamental truths about how human beings should live together. His job was not to invent new truths, but to preserve and transmit the old ones, to make them available to a world that had forgotten them. He was a conservator, not an innovator. In an age that worships novelty, this can seem like a limitation, but consider. Most of the wisdom you will ever need has already been discovered. The challenge is not finding new truths. The challenge is living the ones you already know. Be kind, pay attention, tell the truth, take care of the people close to you. Do not impose on others what you would not want for yourself. These are not new ideas. They have been known for millennia. And yet, how many of us live them consistently? How many of us actually do on a daily basis what we already know is right? Is Ren really so far away? Confucius asked. If I want Ren, there Ren is. It has arrived. Virtue is not far away. It is not waiting at the end of a long journey of self-improvement. It is here, now, in the next small choice you make, in the care you bring to a meal, a conversation, a moment of rest. A kind word need not cost much. The price of praise can be very little. Be kind. It costs nothing, and it matters more than almost anything else you can do. Confucius also had a sense of humor that flashes through the Analects like sunlight through clouds. When a student asked him about farming, he replied, "I am not as good as an old farmer." When asked about gardening, "I am not as good as an old gardener." After the student left, Confucius said to the others, "What a petty person! If the rulers value ritual, the people will be respectful. If the rulers value righteousness, the people will submit. If the rulers value trustworthiness, the people will be sincere. And then the people will come from everywhere. Why would you need to know about farming?" There is a gentle crankiness here that makes him real. He was not a saint on a pedestal. He was an old teacher who got irritated when his students asked the wrong questions, and who was honest enough to say so. He once sighed when a disciple tried too hard to impress him. "In my early days, I still remember how a scribe would leave a blank when he was unsure of a character. Now that practice has disappeared." Even the small disciplines were fading, and Confucius noticed, and Confucius cared. Rest with the human side of him now. The man who fussed about his rice and played his zither and teased his students and wept when he lost the people he loved. The wisdom is in the words, but the warmth is in the man. Confucius returned to Lu in 484 BCE. He was 68 years old. The wandering was over. 14 years on the road, and he had not found what he was looking for, a ruler willing to govern through virtue. He came home to a state that had changed in his absence, and to a life that was about to lose the people he loved most. His son died, Kong Li, who had never been remarkable, but whom Confucius loved in the quiet, uncomplicated way that parents love their children. Then Yan Hui died, the brilliant, joyful favorite, gone at 31, and then Zilu, brave, impetuous, loyal Zilu, killed in a political coup in the state of Wei. He died, according to the records, while tying the strings of his cap. Even in his final moment, Zilu insisted on propriety. A gentleman dies with his cap on. When Confucius heard the news, he wept again. 3 losses in rapid succession: his son, his spiritual heir, his most loyal companion. The old teacher was being stripped of everything. He spent his final years editing and organizing the ancient texts, the Book of Songs, 305 poems that captured the full range of human emotion, the Spring and Autumn Annals, a chronicle of his home state that would become the foundation of Chinese historical writing, the Book of Rites, the Book of Changes. He was not writing his own words. He was preserving the words of others, ensuring that the wisdom of the past would survive the chaos of the present. One day, near the end, he rose early and walked slowly to his door. He leaned on his staff, an old man's gesture, tired and final, and he sang to himself, "The great mountain must crumble, the strong beam must break, the wise man must wither like a plant." His disciple Zigong heard him, rushed to him. "If the great mountain crumbles, to what shall I look up to? If the strong beam breaks, what shall I lean on? If the wise man withers, whom shall I look to as a model?" Confucius told Zigong that he had dreamed of sitting between 2 pillars, the funeral position of the Shang dynasty, his ancestral people. He said, "No intelligent ruler arises. No one in the world is willing to take me as their teacher. My time has come." 7 days later, Confucius died. He was 73 years old. His disciples mourned for 3 years, 3 full years of wearing mourning clothes, of gathering at his grave, of retelling his words, and trying to preserve everything he had taught them. And Zigong, the eloquent diplomat, the wealthy merchant, stayed for 6 years, 6 years beside his teacher's grave, unable to leave. In those years of mourning, the disciples began to write things down, conversations they remembered, sayings that had stayed with them, moments, a gesture, a look, a pause in the teacher's speech that had changed their understanding of the world. These fragments, gathered and organized over the next century, became the Analects. A book compiled from memory, from love, from the refusal to let a great man's words disappear into the silence of history. And the words did not disappear. Within a few generations, Confucius's teachings had become the intellectual foundation of Chinese civilization. Mencius, born a century later, expanded and deepened the master's ideas. The Han dynasty adopted Confucianism as the basis of government and education. The imperial examination system, which lasted for 1,000 years, was built on the study of his texts. Temples were erected in his honor, not as a god, but as the supreme teacher. His home in Khufu became a place of pilgrimage. The Kong family estate grew into a vast compound that still stands today, the longest continuously inhabited family estate in the world. But the truest monument was not a building or an institution. It was the Analects itself. Those fragments of conversation, those remembered moments, that quiet voice still speaking across the centuries. The Master said, the text repeats page after page, and somehow, after 2,500 years, you can still hear him. Rest now, with the knowledge that even the greatest lives come to an end, that even Confucius grew old and tired and sang about crumbling mountains, and that what remains is not the man, but the echo, the words passed from teacher to student to stranger, across the vast distances of time. The lamp is burning low now. The courtyard school is empty. The bamboo mats are rolled up. The scrolls have been put away. Outside, wind moves through the bamboo grove with a sound like whispered secrets. And somewhere far off, the last note of a keen fades into the night. 2,500 years. That is how long these words have traveled to reach you tonight. From a courtyard in ancient China, through the brushes of countless copyists, through wars and burnings and losses and recoveries, across oceans, across languages, across the entire span of recorded human history, to this room, this darkness, this moment. It passes on like this, never ceasing, day or night. The river Confucius watched is still flowing. It has not stopped since the day he stood on its bank and spoke those words. Everything else has changed. Empires have risen and fallen. Languages have been born and died. The very face of the earth has been reshaped, but the river flows on, and the words flow with it. You do not need to carry any of them tonight. They are not homework. They are not a test. They are gifts left on a doorstep by a man who has been gone for 2.5 millennia, but whose kindness still reaches across the centuries. Be good, not perfect, good. Be present, not always, when you can. Be kind, not because someone is watching, because it matters, because virtue is never lonely, it always has neighbors. Confucius would not have expected you to remember everything. He would have been content if you remembered one thing, one small thing that made the world a little more visible to you. A boy practicing rituals with stones. A man playing music so beautiful he forgot the taste of food. A teacher weeping for a student he loved. A river that never stops flowing. Or maybe none of these, maybe just a feeling. The feeling of being in a quiet room late at night with someone who cared deeply about human beings treat each other, and who believed, against all evidence, that we could be better. There is a passage in the Analects where a student asks Confucius to describe himself. The master hesitates and then says, "He is the sort of man who forgets to eat when he is trying to solve a problem, who is so full of joy that he forgets his worries, and who does not notice that old age is coming on." That is who sat with you tonight, not a distant sage carved in stone, a man so absorbed in the love of learning that he forgot to eat, a man so full of quiet joy that his worries fell away, a man who grew old without noticing because he was too busy paying attention to everything else. He would have liked this, the idea of his words being carried on the night air to a stranger he would never meet. He was a teacher, after all. Teaching was his deepest happiness, and a teacher's work is never truly finished, because there is always one more student, one more question, one more late-night conversation in a lamplit room. If I want Wren, there it is. It has arrived. Goodness is here. It has been here all along. You do not need to chase it. You do not need to earn it. You only need to stop long enough to notice that it was never far away. The lamp goes out now. The courtyard is dark. The wind in the bamboo is the only sound, that and your breathing, slow, steady, present. Confucius once said that at 70 he could follow his heart's desire without overstepping the boundaries. You are free tonight to follow wherever your heart leads, and tonight it leads toward sleep, toward rest, toward the deep, quiet dark where nothing is demanded of you, where the river flows on without you needing to watch it, where the only sound is your own breathing and the wind in the bamboo. Sleep now. The teacher has finished. The courtyard is at peace, and the bamboo sways gently in a wind that has been blowing for 2,500 years.